Hello everyone, welcome to the Hawthorne Collection at the University of British Columbia. This is now the fourth installment of this commentary on ethics and fishing. In the prior three installments and one post before that, I tried to clarify what I mean by ethics, which is a general approach to moral philosophy that's concerned with human flourishing, and I think ecological flourishing is included there. And then what kind of fishing I have in mind, being really within the kind of specialized tradition of fishing for Pacific Northwest salmon and steelhead and trout and char with single and double hand rods and swung and grease line flies. In the previous video, I took one more step to try to introduce at least two examples with two books from this collection that show the unique moral harm involved, namely the trauma that a even caught and released healthily fish undergoes, and the kind of moral caution I think that ought to create, the pause it might create as we think about this activity. And also, though, the moral reward of the sheer exhilaration of catching a steelhead, the enthusiasm, the human spirit involved in that. Let me be clear, these two examples are hopefully recognizable. They were both attached to these particular books, one a poem, one a short story by Kipling, but they're by no means exhaustive of the kinds of examples or the kinds of harms and rewards that we may think of. Today I want to introduce another book, which is by Roderick Haig Brown. It's one of his 1930s books. I believe his first book was in 1931. It's a story of an Atlantic salmon. In 1939, he published this two-volume edition called The Western Angler, and in two different volumes. There were under 1,000 printings of that book, and I have with me today, I'll be reading from volume 2 of the 222nd printing of this book. There's also a newer published book that pulls those two together, that's a bit more modern, and is probably a little bit more easier to find. I want to share three passages from the book. For the sake of time, I'm really just going to read the passages, one and then another and then another, and then I'll give a few bits of commentary on them as they relate to some of the themes that I brought up. I find that there are things I generally agree with Haig Brown about, no surprises there perhaps, but he does, I think, offer some slightly different renditions of some of the claims I've made before, and even some of the separations I've made between things, such as the commercial recreational distinction I made in what I believe was video, I think it was video 1 maybe. Anyhow, the first passage I want to share, by the way, all three of these passages come from about 3 pages worth of the 11th chapter of the two-volume set titled Limits and Ethics. And so I mean, this is Haig Brown working probably more as a philosopher and a magistrate, which was his day job, than he is as an angler. But I think it's very relevant to this series. So at this point in the chapter, he's talking a bit about how an angler might want to communicate to other anglers what they encounter about the manners on the river, so etiquette and how to fish and how to not low hole or high hole and that kind of stuff. And he kind of departs from the question of etiquette in this passage I'm going to share here. He writes, "But to make manners or etiquette on the stream worthwhile, there must be some fish in the stream. And the first and greatest obligation of any angler fishing under state ownership is to do nothing that in any way threatens the future of whatever water he is fishing. This does not mean simply that he must abide by legal restrictions. he must be prepared at times to go beyond this and make regulations for himself. And to make such regulations, he needs a certain knowledge of the condition of the water he is fishing and the essential principles of conservation governing its condition. In other words, he is at least under a moral obligation to understand what makes his sport and why. I'm tempted to give commentary, but I'm going to move to the next passage, which is a passage where Haig Brown talks about what he believes the purpose of angling with rod and reel is. The angler, whatever his method may be, and here I assume he means any method of fly fishing and bait fishing or lure fishing, fishes primarily for sport, not food. That is why he uses rod and line instead of going down to the fishmongers or using net or dynamite or some other more quickly effective method. Angling methods have been developed through the desire of anglers to set certain limits upon their own efficiency, so that the taking of fish may be a matter of skill and difficulty. The object of angling is not primarily to catch fish, but to get satisfaction out of attempting to do so and out of succeeding through skill and knowledge. That's the second passage about the skill and knowledge, and also the skill and difficulty. And the third is, just below it actually. Here he makes reference to another book. So I'll be reading a quote in a book to another book. So he continues along this line of thinking, saying, "It follows then that the degree of satisfaction the angler gets from his sport is quite largely proportionate to the rigor of the conditions which he has imposed upon himself. The more rigorous they are, as long as they do not make the catching of a reasonable number of fish quite impossible, the greater will be the satisfaction." There is a passage in J.W. Hills's A Summer on the Test which makes this point perfectly. Mr. Hills, writing of mayfly fishing on English chalk streams, says, "There are days when trout will take anything, when neither bad casting, thick gut, nor wretched imitations will put them down. But," he writes, with a sigh of relief that almost sounds from the printed page, quote, and this is Haig Brown quoting Hills, "Such days are rare. Looking back over many years, I can only remember a few. And to put against such days, I remember many more when trout were wonderfully difficult, when fish were feeding steadily and yet accurate and delicate fishing met with scanty reward." Haig Brown here continues, "When trout were wonderfully difficult," quoting Mills, "not damnably difficult," Haig Brown, or abominably difficult, but wonderfully difficult. So we have these three passages here by Haig Brown. The first saying that an angler must not only obey the law, but must also impose further moral restrictions upon their angling, and also must attain certain knowledge of the condition of the water, understanding of their own sport, not only in terms of its basic behavioral apparatus, but also the why behind it. So these are some pretty, I think, strong, serious conditions, rigorous conditions, we might say. He furthermore adds that the rigor of the conditions also applies, you might say, to the spirit of angling, which he does class as being for sport and not for sustenance. He here uses a much broader definition of sports fishing than my recreational and commercial distinction did. And I have to say that I think he does make sense. I would challenge those who do not use catch and release, myself included. I have a period of time during the year that I do fish with a very clear focus on harvesting, primarily because it's a species of fish that I find delicious. But even during that period, I would have to admit that it's more sport than food. There are probably more effective ways. Again, I could argue with this saying, these are not food, these are not fish you can find at the fishmonger. It would be so illegal for me to use other methods other than single line and rod. But nonetheless, I have little I can quarrel with here with Haig Brown. And then he continues through his example of this idea of the wonderfully difficult, and as that being, I would say, not only a standard of the sport of angling, but also something like a moral standard of sorts that we might think of. And it includes this kind of proportion between the rigor of the conditions on the one hand and the possibility of catching, the reasonable possibility of catching. I think we have examples in the steelhead community. You know, I'm thinking here of people like Todd Hirano or Adrian Cortez or you know, people who are dry lining in the winter or fishing dry flies in the winter, who have created such a maybe imbalanced proportion that maybe Haig Brown would say that they've gone too far. But within this calculus of sport, moral calculus perhaps, there is something commendable, I think, about that, so long as it's done in a spirit of actually trying to catch and not having sort of, there's a lot of talk sometimes about not caring about catching fish, but there has to be some amount of care, I think, to not turn it into just sort of, you know, tossing things into water without purpose and whatnot. All that to say, these three passages, I think, give us an enormous amount of material on the legal and moral limitations of angling, and you might say the spirit of angling, the moral purpose of angling, the human endeavor, the human spirit of angling. And it's rightfully titled Limits and Ethics. This is very much, I think, within the purview of what the ethics of fishing is. And as you can see here, 1939, and there's older books than that. And so, you know, this series is nothing new. The work I do is not the type of work where innovation, I think, is particularly prized. A lot of the work is trying to make sense of the archive of the past and the handed down traditions, and also, of course, dealing with them within the context of today and the future. I think in the next video, I'll focus a bit more maybe on putting some of these ideas into our present context and into the particularly precarious future of steelhead and salmon populations and Pacific Northwest rivers and drainages, such as they are. Anyhow, it's wonderful though to get to read these books and to think about these thoughts, and I hope that sharing them with all of you brings you some bit of the pleasure that it's given me to be exposed to them. So, till next time.